Welcome back. Well, we have a lot to thank God for. In fact, we have all good things to thank Him for. He gives us the air we breathe. He positioned the earth the perfect distance from the sun so we don't burn up or freeze. And He gives us the food we eat every day. Now, God could have chosen to deliver our food to the front door Himself, but He decided to use various other means to provide for us, including human beings. Farmers care for God's creation that we call cows, and those cows produce milk we drink. Bakers turn God's creation that we call wheat into bread. And God provides for our well-being in a multitude of ways through people. Truck drivers haul that milk and bread to stores, where clerks facilitate the exchange between those who have turned God's stuff into table-ready delights and those who want to eat them. The people who work to provide food for us, whether it's the farmers who cultivate it or the manufacturers of the harvesting machines or the pickers in the field, or the truck drivers who get the vegetables to market, or the store owners who lay it out for us to purchase, whether they realize it or not, these people are engaging in God's first commission of Genesis to govern over or rule over the material world and all that it contains. Now, some people do this with a conscious awareness that they're co-working with God, fulfilling that first commission to govern over the material world, like George Washington Carver did. And this gives life meaning beyond just getting the goods to market or earning the paycheck. But most people are really oblivious to the process of co-laboring with God. The great opportunity we have as Christian educators, whether we're educating in the school or the church or as parents in the home, our great opportunity is that we can talk freely and openly about the cooperative role between God and human beings. And we can help our students, or whoever's listening, to be intentional about this co-working with God, as intentional as Carver was. And as Christian educators, we can pull back the veil, so to speak, and we can increase our students' sense of meaning in solving math problems or writing short stories or engaging in science experiments. This co-working with God takes a lot of different shapes and sizes and circumstances. How exactly does a second grader co-work with God? Or a sixth grader? Or a sophomore in high school? Or for that matter, how exactly does an administrator do this? Not to mention the teacher. Well, how about the bus drivers and the coaches? That's what I want to talk about in this session. And I want to bring this matter to a very practical level by giving you a tool that you can use to bring meaning not only to your work as a teacher or a pastor or a parent even, but to your students or your children. And this tool is something that is based on a premise I shared way back in session 1 from Bonnie Wurzbacher, namely that we don't find meaning in our work, we bring meaning to our work. Now, remember, when I use the word work, I'm not just talking about something people do for pay or something they do after they get through school. I'm talking about any work that's worth doing, whether it's for pay or not. Any work worth doing is an expenditure of energy, mental or physical, for pay or not, that rightly manages God's stuff and employs God-given abilities to benefit others, or prepares one to do so. Now, students are managing God's stuff every day. And although they are mostly preparing to employ these God-given abilities to benefit others in the future, they can use their God-given abilities and to benefit others right now as well. Now, the tool I'll be sharing with you in this session is called the DADI plan. And I'm also going to be sharing a variation of the DADI plan that you can use with younger students called the Awesome Activator. I'm going to come at this by first going back to the life and work of George Washington Carver, who I introduced in the first session of this course. Since session 1 was a while back, and since this video is worth watching twice, I'd like you to watch the video about Carver's life once more.
George Washington Carver was born at about 1865, the son of slaves. His father was killed in a log hauling accident a few weeks after George was born. While still an infant, he was kidnapped along with his mother and sister by thieves wanting to make some money by selling them to another slave owner. Moses Carver, their current owner, sent someone after them with a good racehorse to buy them back. The kidnappers took the horse and left George lying on the ground, sick with whooping cough. His mother and sister were never heard from again. Carver's relationship with the Lord began early in life. He wrote, "I was just a mere boy when converted, hardly 10 years old. There isn't much of a story to it. God just came into my heart one afternoon while I was alone in the loft of our big barn, while I was shelling corn to carry to the mill to be ground to meal." Carver had a passion for learning. That passion led him to earn a degree in agriculture from Iowa State College as the first African-American student there. In Carver's day, the South was a one-crop economy, cotton. It was the only crop banks would lend money to farmers for planting. But the soil became depleted through repeated planting of cotton year after year. Carver knew that if the farmers planted legumes, like peanuts and sweet potatoes, it would revive the soil. But the only problem was, in those days, there was no market for peanuts and sweet potatoes. So Carver set out to create a market and invented 300 uses of the peanut and 118 uses of the sweet potato in his lab at Alabama's Tuskegee Institute. Booker T. Washington was the head of Tuskegee at the time. He invited Carver to come to his school when Carver was 31 years old. In his invitation, Washington wrote, "Our students are poor, often starving. We teach them to read and write, but words cannot fill stomachs. They need to learn how to plant and harvest crops. I cannot offer you money, position, or fame. These things I now ask you to give up. I offer you in their place work, hard work, the challenge of bringing people from degradation, poverty, and waste to full manhood." Carver's response was, "I shall be glad to cooperate with you in doing all that I can through Christ who strengtheneth me to better the condition of our people." And Carver did just that. He said, "I took just a handful of peanuts and looked at them. 'Great Creator,' I said, 'why did you make the peanut? Why?' God answered his prayer. He said, 'The great Creator taught me to take the peanut apart and put it together again. And out of the process have come forth all these products.'" He called his lab God's Little Workshop. Included among the many products from the peanut, the sweet potato, and soybean are instant coffee, chili sauce, mayonnaise, molasses, meat tenderizer, shaving cream, wood stain, printer's ink, adhesives, axle grease, bleach, linoleum, and fuel briquettes. Carver gave God the credit. He said, "No books ever go into my laboratory. I never have to grope for methods. The method is revealed the moment I am inspired to create something new. Without God to draw aside the curtain, I would be helpless." Dr. Carver locked the door to his lab when he was creating things. He said, "Only alone can I draw close enough to God to discover his secrets." In 1921, when speaking before the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee in Washington, D.C., he was asked, "Dr. Carver, how did you learn all of these things?" Carver answered, "From an old book." "What book?" asked the chairman. Carver replied, "The Bible." The chairman inquired, "Does the Bible tell about peanuts?" "No, sir," Dr. Carver replied, "but it tells about the God who made the peanut. I asked him to show me what to do with a peanut, and he did."
One great thing about Carver is he was fully aware of his role as a co-worker with God. He saw himself as a co-creator with God, and he saw himself as called by God to love his neighbor through botany and chemistry. Now, his work in botany and chemistry was the practical outworking of his faith. Botany, for Carver, had meaning way beyond peanuts and soybeans. It had meaning way beyond chemistry. It had meaning beyond the things he created, beyond the ink and the plastic. There was no sacred secular divide in Carver's mind. Intentionality was a big part of what was going on in Carver's head. And intentionality is a big part of what holistic Christian education is about. This is where the DADI plan and the awesome activator really come in handy. They are tools that help bring the co-laboring of God to a high level of intentionality, so intentional that it's put into print. Now, to get into this tool, I'm going to use what I know about the worldview of Carver to postulate how I think he might have used the tool himself if he were around to fill it out. First of all, let's take a look at the overall layout of the DADI plan. It's a simple one-page template. DADI, D-A-D-I, is an acronym for Discover, Apply, Develop, and Implement. Discover, Apply, Develop, Implement. Now, to get the idea, I'll walk you through the process as I think Carver might have done this, and then I'll use another real-life example to further reinforce the process. And then I'll have you go through the process for yourself, using the DADI plan as it applies to your own work. And this will provide the confidence you need in leading others through the process as well. Now, some of you may be using the awesome activator version for younger students, and I'll walk you through that before we get through with this session. Actually, some adults might prefer the awesome activator version. That's your choice. Now, as you may recall from reading the course syllabus, one of the requirements of this course is to submit a document that determines alignment between your work and the bigger picture of a biblical worldview by using the DADI plan template. The DADI plan template is in the course content area of the distance learning online platform that you're using. I suggest you put this presentation on pause for a moment so you can print out a copy of the DADI plan template so you can have it in front of you as I walk you through this process. Now, the electronic form of the DADI plan template is a simple Word document. This document will allow you to type data into the blank areas on your computer. Now, be sure to save a copy of the electronic template on your hard drive so you can have a place for it and you know where it is for easy access. Notice at the top of the DADI plan template it says this: in 20 words or less, identify one important challenge, vision, or opportunity that you want to intentionally align with the biblical worldview. Now, this challenge, vision, or opportunity can be a very specific thing that you want to align with the biblical worldview, like a project you're working on with your class, or it can be a long-term goal that you personally have in mind for your own professional development. Now, this whole process will make a lot more sense when we walk through the example of George Washington Carver. Now, Carver might have filled out the top of the plan like this: I want to bring about positive economic opportunities for Southern farmers. Now this obviously is a long-term goal rather than a short-term project, but the DADI plan works just as well for long-term goals as it does for short-term projects. Well, the first step in the area of the DADI plan template that's called Discover is to list key biblical premises that you have discovered from Scripture that directly relate to the challenge, vision, or opportunity that you have identified above. And write these as I believe statements. Now, if you were Carver, you might have written some statements like this. I believe God created plants, and he intends for humans to govern over them. He also might have said, I believe humans have a responsibility to govern over plants in a way that is resourceful and beneficial without waste or abuse. He also might have said, I believe God shares his secrets with those who wait on him for direction. Now, there are a whole lot of other I believe statements that Carver could have put in this area of the DADI plan, of course, but I think these three biblical worldview drivers really relate directly to his specific challenge and opportunity of bringing positive economic opportunities for Southern farmers. Now, when you are filling out the Discover section of the DADI plan for yourself, I'd like you to think about what connections there are between your particular work or a particular project that you're working on, or a particular challenge or opportunity you have. How do those things, or how does whatever it is you're specifying, connect or relate to the larger biblical frame of reference? In other words, how does your project or opportunity connect with the bigger picture of God, the bigger picture of creation, or the bigger picture of humanity, or moral order, or purpose? Those are the 5 hooks I want you to hang your thoughts on here. What makes your particular project or task or vision worth doing? What gives it meaning beyond the project itself? What ties it in with God's designs for people or for things in this material world or beyond this world? What really justifies this project? Think about these kinds of questions. Now, throughout Carver's professional career, I'm sure Carver must have come back to the basic beliefs that I've put in the Discover area of his hypothetical DADI plan. He probably didn't write them down like I have, but I'm sure these baseline premises were close to his heart. They were guideposts for Carver, if you will. They were harbor lights that really kept him going in the right direction. And most importantly, they provided the why behind the what of his work. Now, to give you some help in coming up with I believe statements for the discovery step when you fill out the DADI plan for yourself, and when you help others fill it out, I'd like to share a very helpful resource that I call Questions for Discovery. Now, this list of questions is intended to get the mental juices going when it comes to thinking about how whatever endeavor you're undertaking fits within the larger framework of the biblical worldview. In other words, to know how your endeavor connects with the biblical view of God and creation and humanity and moral order and purpose. I suggest you put this presentation on pause and go to the course content area in the distance learning platform and print out a copy of Questions for Discovery. Now, if you choose to use the DADI plan in connection with a class project, you can have your class together determine the I believe statements for the discovery area of the DADI plan in connection with whatever project they're doing. I suggest you determine ahead of time which specific questions would be most appropriate for the particular project your class is doing. And you may have to translate some of these questions for your younger students using simpler vocabulary. Feel free to adjust the wording of any of these questions in ways that are really more developmentally appropriate for the age of your particular students. I suggest that you limit your I believe statements to no more than 4 or 5. Pick the most important, most relevant connections. Now, the second step in the DADI plan is to list ways you could apply your beliefs, the ones you identified in the Discover step, ways you can apply those beliefs to your focus, that is, the focus you identified at the top of the plan, and then write these ways to apply this truth as I could or we could statements that describe end results. Now that's a mouthful, but I think you'll get the idea as I walk you through these examples. Now here the idea is to take the process from a theoretical level to anticipated end results. In other words, what is it that you or your group wants to accomplish? What difference do you specifically want to make in the world? What is your intended outcome? For example, if you were George Washington Carver, you might write down the following I could statements in the apply area of the DADI plan template. I could co-work with God to create new products from peanuts, sweet potatoes, and soybeans that are beneficial to humans. I could help generate new economic markets for these products. And I could demonstrate my love for farmers by teaching them how to rotate cotton crops with plants that will revive the soil, such as peanuts and soybeans. Now, as you can probably see, this step of the DADI plan is kind of the dream stage. It's the stage where you think about possibilities. Now the next step in the process, step 3, is what I call the develop step. Now here the task is to identify the key training or research or discipline or preparation you or your group must develop in order to be successful in reaching your stated goals of what you can accomplish. And I want you to write these as I must statements. In the development step of the DADI plan, the idea is to identify what background work is necessary for reaching your intended outcomes, the ones you stated in step 2. In other words, what's the price of admission here? Are there any prerequisites for reaching your goals? Now, if you were Carver, you might write something like this. I must turn my attention to chemistry and add it to my knowledge of botany. I must continue to make communication with God a regular part of my day, to hear his secrets about plants and discover ways to make new products from them. I must educate farmers about the importance of crop rotation. I must find new markets for products created from plants. Now finally, in step 4, the implement step, you determine specific action steps, steps that you have to take in order to do what's necessary to accomplish your goals. Now, in Carver's case, he might have written down something like this. I will combine my knowledge of botany with my knowledge of chemistry in the laboratory. I will rise early and seek God for his directives daily and set aside time to be alone with God in his little workshop, listening to what he has to share with me about creating products from peanuts, sweet potatoes, and soybeans. I will develop a school on wheels to go to the farmers and teach them firsthand how to rotate crops successfully. And by the way, he did just that. He might have said, I will establish a center at Tuskegee Institute for the development of renewable resources from plants. And I will contact Henry Ford to urge him to use plastics from soybeans in his production of automobiles. Well, of course, I'm speculating a bit here, but it is based on what actually took place in his life. Well, there you have it, the DADI plan. Discover, apply, develop, implement in a one-page template using bullet points and short sentences. Now, before you try this out for yourself, let me give you another real-life example of a person who was intentional about aligning his work with his distinctly biblical worldview. And that's the 18th century British Member of Parliament, William Wilberforce. Wilberforce is most famous for his tireless efforts to abolish the slave trade in Great Britain about 200 years ago. But he also did a number of other noteworthy things that benefited both Great Britain and the world. You might have seen the movie Amazing Grace, which is the story of Wilberforce. And by the way, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Well, one of the challenges that Wilberforce took on that is lesser known than his mission to abolish the slave trade was a vision he had for helping the British people to reform the way they dealt with animals. He observed quite a bit of animal abuse in his day. And he established the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Now, this organization is still very active today as the UK's leading animal welfare agency. Now, after its founding, the society was later dubbed by Queen Victoria the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. What may not be known by the general public, however, are the strong biblical underpinnings that provided a driver for Wilberforce's tireless efforts to reform the manners of the British people. He did this through initiatives like the Prevention of the Cruelty to Animals Society. Wilberforce became a believer at about the age of 26, and he questioned whether he should continue to work as a member of Parliament. He was a young member of Parliament. Now, I'm not sure why Wilberforce questioned this. Perhaps he had a touch of SSD, the sacred-secular divide. I don't know for sure, but I suspect this was the case. Nonetheless, Wilberforce went to his friend John Newton for counsel on this matter. Now, Newton was a converted slave trader, and he wrote the words to the famous hymn, Amazing Grace. Well, thankfully, Newton advised Wilberforce to stay in politics, which he did. However, Wilberforce was determined to not separate his biblical worldview premises from his work in the public square. And he fully integrated the two. He had a holistic view of Christianity. And the results are dramatic history. I can only speculate on how Wilberforce might have filled out a DADI plan if he were here to do so. Now, I just imagined myself in Wilberforce's place filling out a DADI plan template, and I came up with the following possibilities. Well, first of all, among all the possible biblical worldview premises that might have provided a rationale and an impetus for Wilberforce's vision to bring about reforms in relation to animal treatment, I think his I believe statements might have appeared something like this. I believe God created animals and commissioned humans to govern over them in a way that reflects our role as image bearers of God. Genesis 1:26-28 says, Then God said, Let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let him rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. I believe it is pleasing to God for humans to treat animals in kind and healthy ways. Exodus 20:10 says, The seventh day is a Sabbath. You shall not do any work, nor your animals. Proverbs 12:10 says, A righteous man cares for the needs of his animal. And in Deuteronomy 22:4 it says, You shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fall down along the road and hide yourself from them. You shall surely help him lift them up again. Then in the apply area of the DADI plan, something like the following might have been part of Wilberforce's thinking. Now, these statements provide a bridge between the theological drivers behind his vision, the ones that are mentioned in the Discover area, and the practical outworking of that vision in the real world. You might say that this was his dream. I'm speculating, of course, but he might have said this: I could discourage abusive behavior toward animals among all British citizens, and I could encourage positive behavior toward animals through a nationwide initiative along these lines. I could greatly raise the general level of public awareness of the problem of animal cruelty in Great Britain through the work of a society. Now, as for what Wilberforce might have included in the development area of the DADI plan, where he would have written the preparation he needed to do in order to succeed, he might have said something like this: I must examine the degree and extent to which cruelty to animals is a problem in Great Britain, and I must facilitate appropriate research in this area and develop fitting responses. He might have said, I must convince the public and my peers in Parliament that this problem needs to be addressed. And he might have said, I must find like-minded individuals to help. Well, as a matter of fact, Wilberforce did have help from two key individuals in this matter. One was a fellow member of Parliament, and the other was a pastor. Now, finally, in the implementation area of the DADI plan, Wilberforce might have written something like this: I will appropriate the necessary funding for research and mass communication. I will help sponsor legislation that addresses the issue of animal cruelty, and I will give speeches on this topic. I will work to establish a society called the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Again, there's a bit of speculation on my part, but you get the idea. This is basically how the DADI plan works. It can be used by individuals for thinking through how certain projects or challenges intentionally align with the bigger picture of a biblical worldview, or, as I said, it can be used with groups, such as your class, or whatever group you're leading, or your family. Now, how you choose to use it is up to you. As part of this course, you're required to fill out a DADI plan for yourself, and then email that plan to me. Now, this is your plan, not the plan of your group. Your personal DADI plan. That's what you need to do first. Your DADI plan should relate in some way to your work. Now, most of you watching are probably teachers and administrators, but I realize some of you may not be classroom teachers or school administrators. I hope this is being watched by pastors and youth workers and by parents as well. But whether you're a school teacher or a pastor or a parent, there are areas of your life that you can bring intentionality to bear, especially when it comes to bringing meaning, a higher level of meaning to your work, by aligning it with the bigger picture of a biblical world and life view. Now, you're also required to teach someone else or to teach a group how to use this tool, or how to use a modified version of the tool called the Awesome Activator, which I'll explain in a moment. Now, the group that you instruct can be your class if you're a teacher, or if you're an administrator, it can be your staff, or if you're a pastor, if you're a youth pastor, it could be your youth group, or if you're a father or mother, it can be your own family. You pick. It has to be something that is relevant to you and your mission to affect the thinking of the next generation. Now, if you're a teacher of very young students, say preschool through grade 4 or 5, The DADI plan template that I just went through with you and the one that you're going to use for yourself, it really isn't age appropriate for that young of a student. The DADI plan can work well for grade 6 and above, say age 12 or 13 and above. But if you're working with younger students or younger kids, I suggest you use the Awesome Activator format, which I'll share with you in a few minutes. Actually, the Awesome Activator format also works well with older students, even adults. So after I go through this, if you really prefer to use the Awesome Activator format, that's fine for others. But for yourself, I do want you to use the DADI plan format. And when you teach others how to walk through this intentional process, when you're finished, I want you to send me a 1 to 2 page report on how it went. Just give me some feedback, help me to understand if it was well received and some of the outcomes maybe, or just your impression about how it worked with the group that you're working with. And email that report to me at the same email address I gave before, overman@biblicalworldview.com. Now here's the format for the Awesome Activator. This format is more like a mind map approach, and you'll see what I mean by that as we go along. The basic steps are the same as with the DADI plan format that I just went through with you using Carver and Wilberforce as an example, but the layout is slightly different. It's a 2-page format. The first page looks like this. Now, a copy of this blank form is in your course content area. I'd like you to put this presentation on pause and go into that area and print out a copy of the Awesome Activator and have that in front of you as I walk through this. Now, at the top of the page, the instructions say this: think of an activity, a project, a task, a job, or an idea. You want to connect with the bigger picture of a biblical worldview and write this activity inside the bubble shown in the center of the box below. This activity may be as simple as mowing the lawn or washing the dishes, or as big as writing a book or creating a computer software program. Now, to give you an idea of the versatility of this tool and to provide a non-academic example, I'm going to walk you through the Awesome Activator using the common task of washing dishes as a focus. And we're going to put that in the center of the biblical worldview framework. So let's put washing dishes in the circle that's in the middle of the box at the bottom half of the page, like this. Now, step 2 in the process reads as follows. Brainstorm 3 to 6 specific aspects of the biblical big picture, the biblical worldview, that have a particular connection with your activity. Pick connections that interest you, and write your connections in bubbles around your activity. Now, this is where the mind mapping comes in. It's a brainstorming kind of approach with no particular kind of order or priority. Please take a look at the Questions for Discovery document. I'd like you to go through the list of questions and put a small check mark next to any questions that in your mind have a connection with washing dishes. Now, these are not far-off connections, but really rather direct connections with the task of washing dishes. Go ahead and put this presentation on pause and do this now. Now that you've checked some possibilities, I'd like you to select 5 or 6 that you think are most fitting. Circle those, and if you were filling out an Awesome Activator form for younger students, you would write answers to these questions in the form of statements that are written in the box around the center circle in bubbles. and connect those bubbles to the center circle with lines. For example, one discovery question that is really fitting is under the purpose section, where it reads, how does dishwashing relate to the great commandment of Mark 12:30 to 31? Well, an answer to this question, phrased as a statement and written in the awesome activator here, would be something like this. I am to love my neighbor as myself, and this includes my own family members. Now, a few questions down in that same section, we read, how is God's will being done on earth today through this activity? Now, an answer to that question, phrased as a statement and written in the awesome activator, might be something like this. God wants his will to be done on earth, including dishes to be cleaned, and he works through people like me to accomplish it. Now, in the humanities section of the questions for discovery, there's a question that goes like this. How does the fact that God gives people diversity of gifts and abilities relate to this endeavor? How can I engage in the use of God's gifts to me in this endeavor? And an answer to that question, phrased as a statement and written in the awesome activator here, might be something like this. I have been given gifts and abilities by God for the purpose of blessing and serving others. Now, in the moral order section of the questions for discovery, there's a question that goes like this. How could washing dishes be done in a truly God-honoring way? Now, an answer to that question, phrased as a statement and written in the awesome activator, might be one like this. I am to do all work heartily as for the Lord. In the creation section of the questions for discovery, there's a question that reads, what does washing dishes have to do with the first commission, or the cultural mandate of Genesis 1:26 to 28? An answer to that question, phrased as a statement and written in the awesome activator, might be phrased like this. The material world, including dishes, water, and soap, is a realm that God has commissioned me to govern over. And then in the God section of the questions for discovery, there's a question that goes like this. How does the lordship of Christ relate to this endeavor? How is he honored and glorified in and through this endeavor? And an answer to that question, phrased as a statement and written in the awesome activator, might be this. I am to love the Lord my God with all my strength. Now, dishwashing certainly takes some strength, and applying our strength to scrubbing pots and pans can be a demonstration of our recognition that Jesus is Lord of everything, including the kitchen sink. And serving him in this way is a practical form of loving God with my strength. The next step in the process, step 3, reads like this. Write down some ways you could apply the biblical worldview connections to your activity. Pray, ask God for help. Think outside the box. Talk it over with someone else. In this case, something like this could be written. I could wash dishes as an act of loving service to my family, and it could be a direct expression of my love for those who are closest to me. And I could wash dishes as an act of service to God himself, as a fulfillment of his commission for me to govern over all the earth, including water, soap, cups, and plates. Well, step 4 reads like this. Think about any preparation you may need in order to be successful. Is there any training you need to have, or any research you need to do, or any people you need to talk to? And write these things down. For example, someone with respect to washing dishes might write this down. I must be convinced that dishwashing is the will of God for me, that he wants his will to be done on earth as it is in heaven, in this way, through me. I must be conscious of the fact that when I'm washing dishes, I am doing work that the Lord wants done. I must keep in mind that I am washing the dishes as though he were going to eat on them. And I must fully realize that I'm loving and serving God and others through washing dishes. Now you might notice that these necessary steps were very personal, and sometimes that's the way it is. Now in the final step, step 5, you write specific action steps that you will take in order to turn your activity into something with awesome meaning. Now someone might write, I will put a little sign near my sink that reads, "Here I directly serve God and love others and fulfill my role of governing over the material world." Or they might write this, I will use my dishwashing time as a time of practical discipleship, putting my faith into action in a very real and practical way. Or this, I will wash dishes regularly and consistently as unto the Lord in a timely and organized fashion. Well, you get the idea. That's your action plan. Now, to conclude this session, I'd like to leave you with an example of a present-day follower of Christ who learned to take a holistic approach to his faith and his work. His name is not a household word like Carver's, but one of his inventions is a household word. He invented the laser printer, and his name is Gary Starkweather. Now, Gary Starkweather worked for Hewlett-Packard when he invented the laser printer, and he later worked as a developer of new technologies for Microsoft at the Microsoft headquarters near Seattle, not far from my home. My wife Kathy and I got to know Gary and his wife Joyce when we attended the same church for several years, and during which time Gary taught a Sunday school class to adults that Kathy and I attended. Well, like George Washington Carver, Gary had a love for Scripture, and he loved to teach it. Now, realizing that Gary had a well-developed biblical worldview, one day I asked him if I could do a video interview of him at Microsoft, where he worked, and he agreed. Well, I'll never forget this experience. We met on a Saturday morning while everyone else was gone, and entering the area where Gary worked was kind of like coming onto the set of the Bride of Frankenstein film. The only thing missing was Igor and the arcing electricity, and the rest was there. Well, there was a large whiteboard full of mathematical scribbling in the room, and it provided a very nice backdrop. So I asked Gary to sit in front of it while I did the interview. He did not know exactly what I was going to ask him. As you watch this interview, listen. Listen for how Gary made intentional connections between his everyday work and the bigger picture of a biblical worldview. Listen for how he discovered, applied, developed, and implemented the biblical view of God, creation, humanity, moral order, and purpose with respect to his work with technology. Listen for biblical worldview premises that drive his workplace values and behavior. Now, before you watch the video, let me explain that during part of this video, you're going to see a computer screen that Gary invented. It's called the D# screen. And as you see the screen, it appears to be undulating. Well, in fact, the real screen didn't undulate at all. It's an illusion caused by the slow frame speed of the video camera I was using. Well, let's watch the interview.
And since he made us in his image, I believe that to a great extent the creativity we possess is because the Creator put it there. God put things in us to tool developers and creative individuals, and I think it has to please him when he sees us use those faculties to make something completely new. What do I add as a human being? What does God's image in me generate that is representative of him? And I think that can be done in any skill. And therefore, I think when we use these skills, it can't help but give him pleasure, and hence we feel that pleasure in us. You're using what I built in you. You're unique. There's something special about each one of us that we ought to try and cultivate and ask God, what is this unique part of me that I ought to really make work for you? And when we do that, it has to, I think, improve our relationship, because he's seeing in us respond to what he built in us. And therefore my perception is I should compete in the open market, because that's the best test of my faith. If my faith is really what I say it is, then it should be able to excel in fields that those who don't have that faith play in. And I think as Christians, we need to take our gifts and put them forth in a world which sees excellence from us. You can be a Christian pilot, you can be a Christian garbage collector, you can do any of those sorts of things, because it's the salt and light you carry with you that's the point, not what you do. Okay? And therefore, the real credit doesn't go to me. It goes to him who created me. It's very hard for the water pot to say, look how well I pour, and not give credit to the potter. Many times if I'm having trouble with an idea, trying to understand something, I'll ask God, can you help me with this? I'm trying to understand. And it's not like he cheats for you. It's like when you encourage a child to learn something, you want to bring it out of them. You want them to discover it, but you guide them. And so I kind of feel I ask God to guide me, help me discover what's there. And sometimes some of the greatest ideas are the simplest. Probably the best one in my life was when I was trying to create the laser printer. And has a little spinning mirror in it, and it had to be extremely precise. And the question was, how will this ever be producible when it's got to have such a tiny angular error in the mirrors? And I sat down and thought about that and went back to first principles in optics, since I was an optics guy, and looked at something and then said, well, that's interesting. That would work if it was that way. Then it dawned on me this was something called a cylinder lens. So I drew it out and said, this looks like this would work. And then I thought, no, that's way too simple. Nothing that simple could solve this problem. Well, it solved the problem. It cracked the rock, okay? And it was the closest to having a eureka moment I've ever had in my life. One of the questions I raised to people is, would you rather have a desk which is 18 inches square, or would you rather have a display that's 30 by 40 inches, like your desk? Well, the answer, of course, is, well, of course I would like a bigger display. So I set about to create one, and people immediately look at it and say, oh, that's wonderful, but on its own they wouldn't necessarily have conceived of it. So I see my role as taking an idea and turning it into a handleable reality so that they can begin to appreciate what we might do. And that's what this is. This is a large widescreen display that wraps around you. Let me bring up something that might be interesting here. So here, for example, is an Excel spreadsheet. Let's put some numbers on here, but what you will want to see when I do this is I can now stretch this spreadsheet over the whole screen. So now I have the ability to put large pieces of information up here, or if I don't want that, then I can put it over here. And something else I can do, which we'll find interesting, is we will put up a picture. So let's take, this is a particularly nice one here. So here is a window with a picture on it, and I can now increase that picture to fill the screen. So you can now use it for putting large photos on. And what we have found is, from our tests, that we're seeing significant improvements in people's ability to get work done. And therefore, it becomes a more pleasant environment, and one in which people accomplish more with less effort. And therefore, it's a more pleasant experience to work on. My logic was, well, of course, God built us with peripheral vision. Why would he not want us to use it? So this is an attempt to engage what I've already been designed with. While Einstein wasn't a Christian, he said something very profound once. He said, "Science is the game we play with God to find out what his rules are." And to me, this is the sort of thing I feel here. And I see how the great precision with which the universe is assembled. Some of the things had to be accurate within 15 decimal places in order for the world to work the way it does. By chance? Oh, come on. So often if I write papers, and I've done this a lot recently, I'll tell them, for example, when we're doing a display, that the human being was designed with this capability, and see if they catch it. Rather than the human being evolved to have peripheral vision. The human being was designed with color and peripheral vision capabilities. And I know some of them look at it a little bit and they don't know whether to ask a question or not, but that's what I put it in there for. Read it.
Hopefully you caught many connections between the biblical worldview that Gary holds and his work with technology. Here's just a few. He said, since he made us in his image, the creativity we possess is there because the Creator put it there. He said God put things in us as tool developers and creative individuals, and it pleases him when he sees us use those faculties to make something completely new. He also said when we use these skills that God gave us, it can't help but give him pleasure, and hence we feel that pleasure in us. You're using what I built in you. Well, somewhere along the way, Gary was able to bring extraordinary meaning to his work. And based on the content of this interview, I put together a DADI plan that I think reflects Gary's thought process. In the Discover section of the plan, Gary could certainly have put something like this. I believe God has created all humans in his image, and therefore there is something special about each one of us that we ought to try and cultivate. With this in mind, we should ask God, what is this unique quality that I ought to really make work for you? He held on to that as a core belief. Now, in the apply area of the DADI plan, I could just see Gary writing in something like this. I could put the gifts God has given me to work by taking ideas and turning them into tangible realities in the field of optics. Then in the development section of the DADI plan, Gary might have written this. I must be very knowledgeable about optics. I must learn to compete in the open market. If my faith is really what I say it is, then I ought to excel in fields where those who do not share my faith are playing. And then in the implement area of the plan, he might have written this. I will devote myself to co-working with God to create new products related to optics that will benefit the human race in the 21st century. Now, in conclusion, let me say that the key to bringing meaning to education, whether it's meaning for the student or the teacher or the administrator or the pastor or the parent, is to make intentional connections with something very grand. The great thing about Christian education is we don't have to go far to find the grand. The challenge, however, lies in being intentional about making connections with the grand and talking openly about those connections in the context of everyday life, everyday work, everyday school. Now, how can we systematically think through the possibilities? How can we be highly intentional about instruction that brings the bigger picture to bear? Well, that's what I'm talking about here.
Spirit of God and wisdom is given for all kinds of practical skills. God is pleased with that which we do for him. And really, in a sense, the whole idea of worship and work are so tied together. The same Hebrew word is translated both work and worship. Avodah, avodah. In a tremendous act of condescension, God has invited his creature to enter into his work. And so we're doing his work when we make electronic widgets. It's just wonderful to be grasped by this thought that the work of the Lord, or if you're Scottish, you say the work of the Lord, is not just, although it includes Bible teaching and evangelism. Very important. But it also includes all this fabrication and creation and beautifying and organizing, making things run and maintaining and chores. And we're actually doing his work. You know, I had a beauty salon worker once in one of my everyday life courses, and we all introduced ourselves in the beginning, and somebody said, I'm a doctor, and somebody was a teacher, and somebody was a pastor, and she said, I'm just a hairdresser. At the end of the course, she said, wow, I'm a hairdresser. I make people beautiful.